Hi, everyone. We'll get started now because it's 4 o'clock and to respect everyone's time here. So thanks for joining us for this last and final webinar in our Connect with Nearby Nature webinar series. This is creating maps and signage. And I'm really happy to welcome you here today. And over the next about half an hour, we'll be sharing some tips and examples to help you and your students engage in nearby nature through the creation of maps and signage. And please note that this webinar will be recorded, but we won't share the recording of the question period at the end. All right, so before we get started, I'll just take a few moments to read land acknowledgement. So I'll read our organizational land acknowledgement, which you can see on the screen. And then I'll add a few words about where I'm joining from today. And I invite you to write the territory that you are joining from in the chat and any other words of acknowledgement. So EcoSchools is a national organization aiming to support, amplify, and celebrate diverse communities across Turtle Island. To deepen and reconcile our relationships with these communities, we are working on acknowledging the many ways of knowing and integrating Indigenous perspectives into our programming and communication. We are committed to continually develop our personal and organizational role and responsibilities to better connect with the land, water, air, plants, and animals around us, and learn more about how we can engage, support, honor, and celebrate diverse cultures, voices, perspectives, and communities across Turtle Island. And as part of a growing network of schools and partners, we'll continue to encourage this reflection, growth, and practice with the communities we serve. And for myself, I am a settler on Turtle Island, and I'm joining today from Ngojwanong, also known as Peterborough, Ontario. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwa, Odawa, Potawatomi, Chippewa, Mississauga, Algonquin, and Delaware communities. This land is located on Treaty 20 territory, and I'm grateful for the stewardship that's taken place on this land since time immemorial by diverse communities, despite the detrimental impacts of colonialism. And today, I am excited to talk about the ways we can foster greater connection to land in this webinar. So I'll officially introduce your presenters. So first, I'm Clara Luke, the program manager with EcoSchools Canada, and I'm really excited to be here connecting with you today. I'm joined with Ayub, who will briefly introduce himself.
Thank you, Clara. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining this webinar today. My name is Ayub Hamoudi, and I'm the bilingual program manager, and I will be presenting a part of the webinar today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ayub. All right, so we'll get right into it. This is kind of a short and sweet webinar today. Recognizing that there is some webinar fatigue throughout COVID times. So we're going to dive right in so that we have time for some questions and actually a little mini focus group towards the end of the webinar. So we'll do a quick recap to remind everyone what we've done in this series so far. And then we'll get into creating maps and signage. So I'll walk you through some different steps and considerations for you and your students as you create maps and signage for the school grounds or other accessible spaces in nearby nature. And I'll provide some guidance on getting started in this work. And we'll also walk through the templates that we've developed to support these projects. We'll wrap up by talking about next steps. And then, as I mentioned, we'd just love to spend a few minutes doing what we're calling a mini focus group. So truly just a few small questions about your experience working or educating in nature and nearby nature spaces this year. And then we'll, of course, open up for questions if anyone wants to stick around and share anything else. Okay, so the quick recap here, we held our first webinar back in early December. This was exploring educator opportunities to connect with nearby nature. which focused on exploring why nature connection, and especially accessible nature connection, is important. And we reviewed key considerations to take into account when planning lessons and learning in nearby nature. And of course, we then reviewed how to connect these activities to EcoSchools certification. And then during the next webinar, Creating Field Guides, we walked through ideas, considerations, and best practices for educators and students to create field guides on their school grounds and other outdoor spaces in nature. And if you did miss either of those webinars, we do have recordings of those up on our Nearby Nature webpage, and the comprehensive Nearby Nature resources provide all the information you need to get started. So Ayub is actually now just going to add a link to our webpage so you can refer to those webinars if you would like. And then today, the format will be very similar to the last webinar, but we'll specifically be focusing on maps and signage. So we'll get started. First, I'm just going to point out the key resources, those that I just mentioned, that support map making and sign creation. The first is the educator booklet. That's what we walked through in the first webinar, and it's a really great starting point for all of the nearby nature activities. It includes general guidance and tips for engaging students outdoors, as well as links to great content created by other organizations working in this space. And then the next document is the mapping instructions and template that we'll be covering today, as well as the final resource pictured, which is the signage instructions and template. And all of these resources can be found on the EcoSchools certification application, which is where you can, depending on what activities you've done this year, you can claim points towards your EcoSchools certification. All right. So just a little overview to set us up here. So we're asking, how can map making and creating signage connect students to nearby nature? Mapping really doesn't need to be confined to the geography curriculum. And creating a map for a special outdoor space can be a way to deepen familiarity and spark inquiry across many different subjects. So incorporating a spatial element to environmental learning may open new opportunities for engagement, mindfulness, and geographic inquiry. And the final project can help others connect with nearby nature in those spaces that the maps are being created for. And creating signage for your outdoor space is a really great way to share learning with the broader community and encourage others to become more curious about the spaces around them. So now we're going to launch into the steps and considerations to take. The first is especially relevant perhaps to sign making and sign placing. So if you plan to mount your map or signage on the school grounds or in a nearby park, this is something you'll need to get, which is permission. So you could collaborate with your municipality, or simply your school administration or your school board or district to make sure that you've got the proper permission to install the signs, and or take your students out if you're leaving the school grounds. And as with all of the nearby nature activities, choosing an outdoor location is a key piece. So choose a location that's easily accessible, as we've been emphasizing, such as the school grounds, a ravine, conservation area, local park, boulevard, garden, or even backyard if students are still learning from home and it would be taking place in their neighborhood or at their homes. And if the space is one that you'll visit as a class, we recommend visiting it beforehand to assess transportation, accessibility, and safety considerations. As we mentioned in past webinars, we have other resources in that Connect with Nearby Nature educator booklet, which includes some additional tips to consider when choosing the right location. And next, you'll be determining how the maps or signage that you're creating could integrate with the other components of your Connect with Nearby Nature action. So will students be creating a field guide, or will maps or signage be the main focus? For example, maps could be included as an element of the field guide, which is what we talked about in our previous webinar, or produced as a large sign for public enjoyment. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take a look at the mapping template, so you can get a sense of what this tool looks like, and how it can work for you and your students. And just before we go over to look at that, examples of the maps students could create include navigational maps for recreationalists in an outdoor area, reference maps to highlight points of interest along a trail, relational or story maps to share the history of human and nature in a specific space, or a collaborative observational map to record sightings of species in the area. So there are so many different ways you could go about this map making exercise. But what I'll do now is take you into the template so you can see what we've put together here and what can act as kind of the basis for your map making. So the first 3 pages really provide instruction and guidance, which is what we're talking about in this webinar. So I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but I'm going to skip down to page 4, which provides an example of how the mapping template could work for you. So following this, there's a blank template. But first, I'll just go through these instructions to show you what's included here. So the first step is to embed a blank base map. So that could be something as simple as a Google Maps screen capture into the blank template, and then print that for students to annotate by hand. Or we also have a digital copy, which I'll show you. And for that copy, you can create digital copies and then share the link with your students. Then they can embed that blank base map into the template and work from there. So the basic structure, we have a title for the map, so people can know exactly what to expect. You'll want to include the authors and acknowledgement, such as the students who created the map, but also anyone who's provided essential information or training, such as local Indigenous partners, conservation authorities, whoever you might have collaborated with in this map making. And so for specifically the digital map making, you'd be putting in that base map and then copy, pasting, and moving icons onto the mapping template to indicate different locations and observations that students have found in a certain area. And then, so I'll show you that in a second, just so you can see how that looks. And for analog mapping, this is the template here. So you can see that there's space for the base map, space for a description and a legend. And then I'll go back up here just to show you the digital version. So it takes you to a prompt to make a copy of the document. So you would make that copy. And then you can see the mapping template appears. And then the second page includes some of those icons I was talking about, as well as these little sticky notes that can indicate the places and locations on the map. So I'll just go back to our presentation now to take you through our signage template, which is the next piece. So with the signage template, again, we have instructions on page 1 and 2. And then when you go down to page 3, you'll see that we've created There are actually 3 templates for different types of signage. So the first one is a general signage template, and this just provides a simplified version of information that might have also been in your field guide. You can see there's a space for a photo, a caption about what the object or plant is, and a description about why the organism is special. And then an area to provide your school name. So that's what the template looks like here. It can be directly cut out of this template, or you can use these as inspiration if you'll be making the signage on a different type of material, like wood signage that you might collaborate with a tech class, or any other type of signage that you might use by making use of reused materials. And I'll just take you through a couple other examples of the signage templates we have. The next one is a use your senses signage template, where you can insert a photo and also indicate what it looks like, what it smells like, feels like, and sounds like, in order to create more of a sensory connection with the plant or natural object. And then finally, we have an ecological I Spy template, which can be used to point out different features of an area. So this can be located in maybe your schoolyard, and from the signage, you're asking the viewer to find the different objects and plants that are in their view. So I'll take you back to the webinar now. And after you're familiar with the templates and have decided how you're going to use them, or if you're going to just use them for inspiration, you'll need to think about the audience and the maps or signs' intended use. So some of the questions to consider here include what kinds of information should be represented, what level of detail or accuracy is required, and particularly for the map, what format should the map be? Should it be that digital version or analog? Should it be to scale or representative? So we'll now talk a bit more about what materials might be needed, and mapping may require more materials, so I'll just go over those quickly first. So the following list is just an overview of things you might need depending on what type of mapping you undertake. So of course, a copy of the mapping template, if that's what you're using, notebooks or printouts of the mapping template, writing tools, compasses, measuring tapes, location markers for going out and doing the mapping exercise. And for signage, it really depends on the desired format. So signage could be laminated papers, wood burned or painted plaques, printed plaques, etc. So really choose the option that aligns with your learning objectives and budget. And then finally, you can start getting outside and start mapping or sign making. As always, establish safety protocols for your class, communicate clear spatial boundaries, emergency response plans, and learning expectations so students know how to respond in unexpected situations. And if creating maps, teach students how to use the mapping tools and technologies in the field as applicable. So these might include barefoot mapping, GIS guides, or the EcoSchools template that I've demonstrated. So all of those are linked in the resources that we've showed you. And students can then record the location of field observations on their blank mapping template, and as well as through taking notes, photos, or videos along with your geographic information to create that rich and detailed map. And then for signage, you can encourage students to take as many notes and details of their observations as possible so that they can properly identify their observations afterwards when they're back in the classroom. And it may be helpful to record observations on a draft copy of their signage templates. So to support the creation of these maps or signage, students might choose to physically flag the locations of the field observations so that they can be revisited easily in the future. And finally, we have collecting data and finalizing maps. So to refine their draft maps and signs, students can incorporate a peer review process and refine their works by sharing their learning with others. You might also need to consider raising funds to support the implementation of durable outdoor signs that can be enjoyed by many people through different seasons, and connecting your project to other EcoSchools actions, as I mentioned before, such as our repurposing and innovative recycling action, if you're using pre-used materials for your signage. And then sharing your learning. So students can share their maps and signage with the school community and broader community. And we have lots of other ideas for creative ways that students could share their learning in that educator booklet. But just to be conscious of our time here, I'm now going to pass it over to Ayub, who is going to cover our next steps and then facilitate our mini focus group here today.
Thank you, Clara. So here now are the next steps. So if you have engaged in the nearby nature action with your students this year by creating field guides, maps, or signage, please let us know about it and claim points toward EcoSchool certification by filling out the Connect with Nearby Nature action on the EcoSchool certification application. And because we now find ourselves in April, the submission deadline is coming up soon. We have an early bird deadline on April 29. So schools that submit on or before this date will be entered into a draw for a celebration package. Our final deadline is Friday, May 30. So make sure to complete all actions in your EcoSchool plan by then. And do not forget to press the submit button, which is very important. And remember that you can reach out with questions to programs@ecoschools.ca.